Welcome to Planet Geo, the podcast where we talk about our amazing planet, how it works, and why it matters to you.
Jesse.
Chris.
Wow, Jesse. All right, I'm gonna start this off, Jesse.
Okay.
You paused, and so I'm gonna take advantage of this.
Yeah, please do.
We just got done interviewing Dr. Lee Kump, or Dean Lee Kump. He's the dean of your department, and he's the boss of your boss. You said. I wanted to hug him. I can't because he's in Pennsylvania. I'm in Michigan. I thoroughly enjoyed this interview on so many levels.
So many levels. So I agree completely.
He's a scientist. That's how he made his name as a scientist. Then he kind of moved into administration, and we asked him about that. And I just, what I want to say is, for everybody, make sure you stick around to the end, to one of our last questions when we ask him about what led him into administration. It's a powerful answer. And
it's the best
I think
answer.
It got both of us choked up. Yep.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's the best answer you could possibly give for a reason to get into administration, I think. I mean, I had a hard time not getting choked up. I had goosebumps, listening to it. And he has this background as an amazing scientist, was one of the founding members of this entire field, kind of created this field of Earth system science. I mean, I have to run through his resume a little bit here because it's so impressive. So you're right. He's the dean of right now at the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences at Penn State University. So there are 5 departments in the College of Earth and Mineral Science. He's the head of that. So, there are dozens, hundreds of faculty members in those 5 departments, so many undergrads that go through, so many graduate students, and he's kind of in charge of the full thing. Lee got a PhD from the University of South Florida. He started at Penn State in 1986, as he said, and was around and really one of the founding members of this brand new field called Earth System Science, which he gives a really good description of, and I think we have a lot of appreciation for. He's a fellow of the Geological Society of London, Distinguished Service Awards. He's won research awards. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, which is the premier institution in the United States. It's like the award you can get. It's the capstone award you can get, is being inducted into the National Academy of Sciences here. He has published over 130 papers. He has over 20,000 citations. He's got an amazing resume, amazing research record, and in my opinion has done an amazing job and is widely regarded as a really, 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 really good dean of our college here at Penn State. And I think this interview kind of shows you why.
I think it absolutely does, Jesse. You need to count yourself very fortunate to have an administrator like this. I think this is the exception. Lee Kump is not the rule.
No, I think you're exactly right. And we hope he keeps doing it for many more years to come. Definitely. He's an amazing interview. And I really liked our discussion of the future of geoscience education. Like, what's the value of geoscience and how that might be shifting from his chair, from his he's got the long view and the high view. He's a dean now at a premier institution with a bunch of different colleges in it, but he also has that long view. He's seen it evolve in really interesting ways over the last 30 years, 40 years of his career. So I thought his perspective was really unique and original on this, and I really liked it. So
I agree. Hey, let's get to it, Jesse. Lee Kump.
All right. Dean Lee Kump, welcome to Planet Geo. It's a real pleasure to have you here. I'm excited for this conversation.
Well, thanks so much for having me. I've been looking forward to it myself.
Yeah, this is going to be great. And I guess maybe for the record, you're at Penn State. You're the Dean of Earth and Mineral Sciences, the college. So I'm in the Department of Geosciences. You used to be in our department. You're now the dean. So I don't know what the org chart looks like, but you're my boss's boss or something like that.
Yeah,
somewhere
right.
Along the line, there's a lot of Penn State talk.
Yeah, so watch the questions you ask, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly right.
Perfect. Yeah, Jesse, his office is way bigger than yours.
Oh yeah. Oh wait, yeah, exactly. I don't even know, Lee, if your office. What office did you start in our building? Do you remember where?
Yeah, room 210.
210,
which is the smaller faculty offices there.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I'm 2 floors above you right now in the 4th floor, small offices, small starting faculty offices.
Yeah, one progresses in their career to bigger offices. Although it doesn't matter anymore. We used to have file cabinets full of reprints and books.
Yeah.
Things that you just don't you don't amass anymore. So I don't know what people want laboratory space, I think now.
I guess that's right. Yeah, lab space and storage space for rocks. That's
Yeah,
one of my
geology
big
is great. Right. Well, that's what your basement at home is for.
Yeah, that's exactly
right.
right.
You
Basement,
got that.
garage, hang them on the wall behind me. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. All right, Chris, I'm really excited, Lee, to hear your answer to Chris's first question here out of the gate. I'm excited about this.
Yeah, Lee, it's so good to see you. It's been, I think, 2 years since I saw you. We ran into each other at, I think, GSA or AGU. I can't remember which one.
Yeah, I can't remember either one. After our first video introduction.
That's right. I forgot.
That's right.
Yeah, the video introduction. Chris got the College of Earth and Mineral Sciences Inspiring Educator Award, right?
Yeah, he's our in the first class in our Educator Hall of Fame.
Educator Hall of Fame. That's right. Yeah, that was great. And Chris, you didn't know it was coming, and I think you're
scared the crap out of me.
Yeah.
I thought I was getting fired.
The superintendent and the principal walk into your room.
Everybody's outside my door. I'm like, what is happening right now? The only thing that was missing was a police officer. You know?
Yeah. And it's like, oh, jump on video because you're getting an award. That was great. Yeah, I forgot about that. That was a couple years ago. That was awesome. Yeah.
Well, hey, Lee, let's go ahead and jump in. So we always ask this question. It's our lead out question to everybody that we have on our show. What got you into geoscience? Is there a story that's involved? Is there a particular aha moment? Just, kind of what got you going?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Actually, it's a question that I ask other geologists myself, because it was my hypothesis that it was a K through 12 educator who got them interested in science and perhaps in geology. I mean, I, like many of my colleagues, was interested in rocks as a kid, although I didn't really care about figuring out what they were, naming them and classifying them, what minerals were. I just liked them because they were pretty, I think. It's probably not a good thing for a professional geologist to say, but I also love being outdoors, hiking, and so kind of preconditioned to this area. But like I said, it was an 8th grade earth science teacher who got me interested in this, Ms. Rodehaver, and she was willing to let us do experiments. She took us on field trips. Those of us who are interested in doing that, she brought up the telescope at night and let us, she taught us about the planets and the constellations and stars, let us burn a little section of grassland behind the look
Really?
at that's
amazing.
Yeah, we actually got the fire department to sit there and supervise that experiment.
That's great.
But what really got me hooked, so that got me interested in science and experiments and field work, but what really got me hooked was a lecture by a guy named Peter Wiley. I don't know if you know that name, famous petrologist. He was at the University of Chicago at the time. I was a senior in high school, and I went to Chicago on a recruiting visit, and he gave a lecture on the way the earth works and talked about plate tectonics. And this was the mid 70s. And so plate tectonics as a theory was just being developed. So everything was really excited, and he just conveyed that excitement. And I really, it stuck with me to better understand the way the earth works. So I went to the University of Chicago, took the first introductory geology class from him. It was just amazing. He taught it from a kind of a popular science book that he had on plate tectonics. And so it was really his influence, together with those earlier experiences that got me hooked in sciences.
So that kind of sold the deal right there then, huh?
Yeah.
So I have a question, Lee. Does Ms. Rodenhaver, does she know what she knows? That's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, I gave her credit in my dissertation, and I sent her a copy of that. But I also nominated her for this class for our Educator Hall of Fame. And so really I put together the Hall of Fame because I wanted to recognize her. But then I realized, talking to faculty in the department like Jesse and people at AGU and GSA, that so many of them had been influenced by K through 12 teachers. And most often it was an earth science teacher they had in middle or high school. And we just don't recognize that. We don't pay it back typically, and we certainly don't recognize it typically long after we graduate. Although I was glad to hear that you and Jesse had stayed connected, and turned out that many of our faculty nominators had stayed in touch with their high school or middle school science teachers. So it was nice to hear.
That's a very cool. Sorry, Chris, can I interrupt with a really quick
Yeah,
one?
go ahead.
Lee, what state did you grow up in that you had earth science in 8th grade?
Minnesota.
Minnesota. Oh,
Yes,
okay.
I was in a suburb of Minneapolis.
Okay, gotcha. And so you're allowed to burn the grasslands, at least at that
Yeah.
time. in Minnesota, behind your school.
Yeah, we had never had anyone ask, but we were learning about succession, and we thought, hey, let's see if we can visualize some of that ourselves. So.
That's very cool. I mean, that's crazy. Yeah, creative educators. That's so valuable. Sorry, Chris, I interrupted.
I forgot my question, so it's okay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, Lee, was it a direct line then for you in your sort of educational pathway? You did you go to University of Chicago? Is that right? You were on a recruiting. Okay.
Yeah.
And were you kind of like? I mean, you heard a great talk by a petrologist. University of Chicago was the home of experimental petrology for a long time in this time period. How did you manage to go there and not get into that, I guess? And what was the rest of your trajectory like?
Yeah. Well, so I went on every field trip that they offered, and many of those were being led by a guy named Fred Ziegler, who was a paleogeographer, paleontologist. And so we took these field trips that were really focused on paleontology and sedimentology. And so I got really interested in that. Actually, Peter Wiley, when I was a junior, I think he offered me a job, just 10 hours a week. And I worked in a lab and did experimental petrology on carbonatites. I still remember that. I actually,
really, cool.
Well, so they had a valuable graduate student who they didn't want to risk losing by putting them in a lab where things were blowing up under high pressure in these little salt bombs. And so so they chose me to they paid me $10 an hour as an employee to run the risk of loading these experiments.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Let's take Lee. He's expendable. Let's put him in there.
Yeah, that's right.
That was my theory anyway. So then the following year, I wanted to do an honors thesis, and Peter Wiley, well, we called him Dr. Wiley, of course. Dr. Wiley, he approached me with a project, and I turned him down, and he was really shocked by it. To your point, experimental petrology wasn't resonating with me.
Well, I can understand if you're just, the person in the lab who's expendable. I could see why they would turn you off from petrology.
Suddenly now I'm becoming valuable, right? Well,
yeah.
that previous year, and I seemed to know what I was doing in the lab. Well, anyway, so, but I actually had taken a graduate level geochemistry class from a guy named Bob Aller, who's now at Stony Brook. But he was willing to. I had done some interesting things on a field trip, and he helped me do that. I was actually looking at. It was a crossover. I was looking at I wanted to look at the preservation of ash layers and sediments. It just struck me as odd. On the field camp, we were out in Northern California, in the Mount Shasta area, and
Chris loves Mount Shasta. Don't start talking about Shasta. You were going to start a whole tangent here.
Yeah. Well, so we were there in the summer of 1980, and we had actually gotten booked for helicopter trips up to Mount St. Helens because it had erupted in May of 1980. And so we were there in September, and we're going to go up and tour Mount St. Helens, which we did on foot, but there was heavy fog and they had to cancel our helicopter flight.
Oh, too bad.
So I collected some volcanic ash there. I had a collection of Mount St. Helens volcanic ash. But the reason I was interested in that, I'd already become a certified scuba diver. So I was trying to figure out a way to work scuba diving into my senior thesis. And so I talked the faculty member there and the TA, who also happened to be a scuba diver, into letting me go diving in this lake and core it and look for the history of eruptions of Mount Shasta in the ash lake that I thought must be in this mud.
How deep did you go?
It was only like 25 feet deep.
Okay.
So it was pretty easy scuba dive. And we ended up with these cores that had ash layers in them. And these ash layers are these really distinct, centimeter thick layers in a sediment that in the upper like 12 centimeters, 15 centimeters, thoroughly bioturbated by one of these worms that puts their head down in the mud and eats, and then has this long body, and they poop out the top, and they're churning like 10 to 12 centimeters of sediment. But there are these ash layers in there that were a centimeter thick and really distinct ash layers. So I was trying to understand how you preserve ash layers when you're stirring the sediment over 12 centimeters. Why didn't the ash get stirred up in the mud? And so I went back and I was asking this guy Aller about it, because he studied bioturbation in Long Island Sound muds and the chemical changes that take place in sediments associated with bioturbation, stirring of the mud by organisms. And he was in that. So we set up some like ant colony experiments where we put in mud, and then we put in these ash layers, and then we inoculated with tubifex, which is the worm that lived in this lake and also happens to be abundant in the Chicago River because it loves contaminated environments. In fact, it's it's a macrobenthic indicator of a polluted environment. And so, so I convinced Bob to go down there with me and go mucking around in the Chicago River to collect tubifex, which we did. So anyway, it turned out to be too slow of an experiment for my senior thesis. So I ended up looking at geochemical evolution of Long Island Sound muds, but we kept the experiment going anyway. And just to finish that story, it turns out that, as you might guess, tubifex worms don't eat ash. It's glassy, it's sharp, and it has no nutritional value. So when they got down to the ash layer I buried in the sediment at about 5 centimeters, they bioturbated down to that. They penetrated through it and started eating below it, and actually excavated a hole underneath the ash layer. But and so the ash layer got buried eventually, just through avoidance by
really.
I thought that nobody's ever published anything on that I know of. Still out there.
That's really cool. Was this from the last eruption, like 105 years ago, or 100? I don't know, 7, 8 years ago now.
We had that layer in the Mount St. Helens mud. Plus, there were some deeper ashes too from the earlier eruptions. We could get sedimentation rates and that sort of thing with the ash layers as markers.
I've never really thought of that. I mean, I teach the GSci 1, which, as you know, Lee, goes out and looks at along 322 here, looks at the bentonites in the. I've never actually considered the preservational aspect of that. But so how do you propose that because the ash would fall on top, and why do they not work it in at the initial depositional stage? Well, I can see why they avoid it once it's in the layer, as you described, but when it's deposited.
Well, but I think, and there's different kinds of bioturbation. And if we're back in the Ordovician, so it's a really good question. What about different styles of bioturbation? This upside down feeding, you could kind of imagine that in a case like that, or in Castle Lake there, that they get buried in that, but they still have their heads down below the ash, and they're churning that. When the ash gets to their head layer, then they would retract and eat above it. But in the Cambrian Ordovician, what did the trilobites do when they got buried in ash? And maybe they died and then had to repopulate after some sedimentation covered up this ash layer. I don't know.
Oh, that's really interesting. I never thought about that. That's cool.
Jesse, this is one more example of biology messing up our geology.
It just gets in the way.
We've never talked about this one before.
I know that's a long-running theme. Both of my dad and Chris's father were both high school biology teachers. Excuse me. So we have this long-running kind of family debate about what's more important, biology or geology. And
and for most for field work, biology just gets in the way if you've got.
That's right. Exactly right. That's our main point. All this lichen, all these trees covering up the stupid rocks. I mean, come on, Sorry.
No, go ahead.
This leads really nicely into the thing I want to kind of bring up, which is this thing called Earth system science, I guess. And Lee, I don't think I've ever told, maybe never anybody at Penn State, but when I got the Penn State job offer, I had colleagues in University of Alberta who I'd become friends with when I was there in graduate school, and this was long after I'd left there. But they're like, "Oh wow, dude, congratulations, that's amazing!" And I'm like, "Yeah, thanks, this is great." They're like, "Wow, that's so cool." The School of Earth System Science is what they called it, and I was like, "Oh, what do you mean?" Because this isn't my field, and so I didn't really I didn't really know what they meant by this. And they're like, "Dude, Kump, Castling, Brantley, like they invented the field. They wrote the book, they invented the field. And, you're among them, but we have some very prolific, very famous scientists that you all worked together in the 90s and created this field. By my understanding of it, kind of not only you guys, but we're certainly instrumental in the development of the field of Earth system science. So could you give us like the elevator pitch on what Earth system science is? And then I want to ask about the history and the development of it.
Sure. Well, I think it gets back to Wiley. It's a study of the way the Earth works, but it's not just the solid Earth, which is what Wiley was focused on, but it's all the components of the Earth system. So it's the solid Earth, the oceans, the atmosphere, the cryosphere, that frozen part of the world, and also the biota, how life interacts with all of these components of the Earth. So it's treating the Earth as a system of interacting components. These components are, the oceans, atmosphere, life, the solid Earth, and they're all interacting in ways that ultimately can do some really cool things like stabilize the climate system over long periods of time and other environmental conditions, the acidity of the oceans. And so it's an approach to studying the Earth that focuses on how it functions, how it can be sustained over, all time scales, including billions of years. How did the Earth remain habitable as our sun became brighter and brighter over billions of years? That involved a change in the atmospheric composition that also included processes like the alteration of the crust, weathering of the crust. And so it's a study of how these components interact in ways that sustain life and the viability of the planet.
So is this a major then? Is this a series of classes?
I actually once got invited to the University of Hawaii, and I thought I was just going to give a lecture, which I did. But then I met with the dean at the time. This was many years ago. And they said, well, what we really have you here for is we're thinking about having a major in Earth system science. And we want to know how you've done that at Penn State. And I had to admit that we don't have a major in Earth system science, and we still don't have a major in Earth system science. Well, we have the textbook and we practice it. There's tension around these interdisciplinary fields, though, that there's a sense that you ought to become an expert in one of the areas that are contributing to the interdisciplinary area, and then do the interdisciplinary work at a higher level, like in graduate school. I've challenged that, but I think that that's still a prevailing view. And it even oceanography, most schools prefer students to study biology, chemistry, physics, or geology as undergraduates, and then do oceanography or system science at the graduate level. So we don't have majors, but we do have the ability to build that coursework into your degree program in geosciences or in meteorology. So you're developing that broader understanding of how the Earth works as a system.
So this time, I mean, I don't know what time stamp to put on this. Is this the 80s? Is this kind of the 90s? Broadly, this era. What was the change? Was it a recognition for how powerful some of these feedback loops are in the Earth system way of thinking? Or was it like all the fields had to be developed on their own such that you could get the high level view of the Earth as a system? Like what led to this kind of?
Yeah, well, there were two things really, I think, that I would trace it back to. What really influenced the development of Earth system science at Penn State was participation by some of our faculty members at the time in a NASA effort. And NASA, I think NASA's Earth Science Group was starting to do satellite remote sensing, and they're looking at Earth as a planet. And of course, we went to the moon and we looked back on this blue and white ball, and we were thinking, and so they had this, so NASA researchers had this perspective of the Earth, and they're looking at the dynamic Earth. And Francis Brotherton is often credited with, there was the Brotherton diagram, maybe the first Earth system science box diagram of all the different components. Oh, that was one thing. I think the other part of this that became very important, especially in terms of bringing in life into it, was the work of James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, who were the originators of the Gaia hypothesis. This view that we should be thinking about the Earth like a living organism. These components I was discussing, the rivers are like the bloodstream, and the planet is breathing because we have photosynthesis at the global scale that's releasing oxygen and taking carbon dioxide, and that the interaction of the physical and non-living and the living world is capable of regulating planetary temperature and ocean pH. So it was those two things, kind of this view of Earth from space that demanded sort of integration of the disciplines to really understand what was controlling that dynamic planet, and then bringing in life through the Gaia hypothesis. These are all things that are happening in the late 70s, early 80s. We at Penn State were fortunate that the deans at the time, Charlie Hostler and John Dutton, who had been, they're both meteorologists, but deans of our college, and they had been participating in this NASA effort. They said, we need to get ahead of this game. And so they launched what was to be called the Earth System Science Center, one of the first global change institutes at Penn State, hired Eric Barron, who became dean and then ultimately president of Penn State, to launch this, and then hired a bunch of us. In the early days, I was fortunate my timing was just right. Came here in 1986.
Oh, interesting. So it was kind of a, sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Lee, I'm really, really interested in what you're saying here. So I have a question then. Like, in an ideal world, do you think that this is the way that, young students and undergrad students should be taught about geology as Earth as a system like this?
I do think so. And even our local high school now teaches Earth science as an Earth system science. I think part of that is that it teaches us that everything is interdependent. And, we're dealing with issues like climate change today and environmental disturbance, pollution at a global scale. And things that are happening on the other side of the planet are influencing us just as much as if they were happening here in State College. And so I think that, for everyone to fully appreciate the capacity of human activity to disturb the planet, all these interconnections or teleconnection, it really argues that this ought to be an integral part of secondary education, maybe primary education, rather than just teaching the disciplines as independent subjects to be studied. Focus on the interconnections.
So what's the roadblock, you think?
Well, I mean, I used to say it was the traditional education of the people who were having to do the educating.
That's right.
And it could still be true. But I think that might be part of it. I think, high school curricula slowly evolve, college curricula obviously slowly evolve, and probably for good reasons. We don't want to be following every fad as they come down the path. We thought maybe having a textbook would, back in the days when textbooks were essential, every class had to have a textbook that anchored it. There were no textbooks in Earth System Science. So actually it was John Dutton who came to me in my third year at Penn State and says, Lee, the field needs a textbook in Earth System Science, and Penn State needs to be the one to write that textbook. If it's not the first one, it's got to be the best one. And I think you're the one to do that. And I said, John, I don't have tenure. And everyone told me that the worst thing I could do is to write an introductory textbook. That's the one thing I'll guarantee tenure. He said, if you get anybody tell you that, send them down to my office. so we started working on the textbook. It actually took us about 10 years. So I had gotten tenure by the time the first book was published. So.
Okay, I gotta ask, do you still have the book? Like, how many editions of this book were made, first of all?
Well, we're in the 4th edition now. Just published the 4th edition. So I have actually boxes of the materials that went into that first edition.
Oh my gosh!
All the things we brought together. Maybe Jim Casting and Rob Crean and I, the three co-authors of books, were the ones who were first teaching the class, which was called Gaia, the Earth System at the time. I wanted to bring in Lovelock. He had been a mentor of mine. So I brought in Gaia, but it's Earth System science. And so we taught this class, and, teaching the class is a real challenge because you need to know a little bit of biology and ecology, and you need to know, atmospheric photochemistry, and you need to know, plate tectonics, at least at a level to credibly teach these. And that's really a challenge too. And so to have a single introduction to that is really a problem. And we spent, the reason it took 10 years is we were also struggling in the classroom, to both bring, to give the students the fundamentals of what they needed to understand so many different disciplines. And for that, we turned to Lovelock, who always said, you got to treat this from the top down. What are the global controls on things? You're not going to understand everything about cellular biology, but what is it about life that really impacts the planet at a global scale? So we distilled that, did a lot of backpedaling in the classroom, in our lecture notes year after year, refining this. But I think, with our textbooks, and now after 20 years of refinement and 4 editions, we've distilled that into that kind of essential material that I think can be taught by disciplinarians from a variety of disciplines and be accessible to, undergraduates across the majors. And we've had, quite a bit of sales at the high school level as well.
Oh, right. Oh, that's
high school
great.
science
Wow.
teacher, high school science students. I think it's easier for a science-oriented high school student and high school science teacher to teach this class than it is for an art major at Penn State to understand it. But we have art majors in our class too.
Oh, that's really interesting. So, a comment and then a question. First of all, Lee, thank you for never coming to my office in my 3rd year and saying, "Hey, you need to write a textbook on something." That I can imagine that being an incredibly stressful interaction to have had with your dean at that point.
Yeah.
So
maybe there's another reason he didn't ask you to do it, Jesse.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's right. I'm certainly not qualified to do anything like that.
There is some textbook out there that we need to write, and I'll be checking it on you after, when the time is right.
When the time's right. Okay. Yeah, sure. And then on the topic of the education side, I guess, well, okay, I'm curious what your view is from your high level view here of undergrad education, and maybe specifically you're the Dean of Earth and Mineral Sciences. So there's all sorts of different fields that you're kind of in charge of, but maybe if we could focus on geosciences specifically. I feel like I went through and Chris went through at a time when people got into geology because it's cool, like volcanoes, plate tectonics, cool rocks, whatever. Like that was a really big motivator. It's just cool. And now I wonder if it would be better if students got into it because it's important, both from all the sustainability, earth systems things you're talking about, let alone the need for more raw materials and this retirement in the exploration and mining industries that we're going up against. So I guess, do you feel that same way?
Oh,
Yes
yeah.
or no? And do you see that transitioning happening amongst the students?
Yeah, I see it amongst the students and among our early career faculty, that even though you got into it because it was cool, and many of us, that's what drew it to us. If we go back a generation before mine, they got into it because there were problems to solve. Penn State had a very strong economic geology program, and across the nation, why did geology and geochemistry grow? It was around ore deposits, understanding ores. After World War II, uranium geology and geochemistry was a huge national need. We needed to understand uranium deposits for weapons, for energy. And so there was a period there, the 60s, 70s, where it was very applied. The geoscience was very applied. 70s on into the 80s, we kind of moved away from that. And both in terms of the work that the economic geologists were doing, one of our ore deposits geologists moved into studying the rise of oxygen in the Precambrian. He had worked on some rocks in Canada, South Africa, Western Australia, that now, instead of looking at them as ore deposits, he was thinking about them as reflective of what the atmosphere was like at the time. And the funding followed that as well, and the student interest. I think we're coming back around time. There are some really serious problems we need to address, and you've mentioned several of them. And there's a real need for people who understand how the earth works, where these raw materials come from, because as they say, if you can't grow it, you have to get it from the earth or the ocean. And so we need to understand that the geohazards are still there too, right? But we need to understand those because the hazards are real world challenges. We're trying to manage risks from all of these things, climate change impacts. We need to understand hill slope stability. And so geomorphology is still a really important area. Water supplies, and the geosciences tends to focus on the subsurface for water supply. And then the engineers are focusing on surface water, but that's not a clean distinction either. And so we have people who look at modern river processes and erosion. So understanding the subsurface, where can we store carbon dioxide if we're trying to sequester it? Where are we going to store hydrogen? Where can we store energy in general? If we're using renewable energy to generate, we have that problem of storage, and there are batteries, of course, but there may be ways that we can utilize the subsurface. And to do that, we need to understand the geology of the subsurface. It isn't a sandbox, right? So there's just so many areas in which somebody who understands the earth can contribute to solving important problems for society. And I think that's what motivates students today. They want to make a difference. It's what's motivating many of our faculty members as well, early career, but also some of the senior faculty members who have spent the last 20 years focusing on curiosity-driven science are saying, hey, I'd actually like to make a difference.
It must be an interesting thing to watch from your chair. Sorry, Chris.
No, Jesse, this is so interesting. You've never framed this question like this to me. We've never talked about this, but what a really interesting observation, because when I first started teaching 30 years ago, I didn't have an answer for why is this important? Why is what you're doing in teaching? Why should students learn this? Well, I'm thinking, well, because it's awesome, but I have evolved into this too. Now I have such an easy answer. This is an important thing that we need to learn as much about this planet and the way it works as we possibly can if we're going to take care of it. But I didn't have that at the beginning, and I'm just shocked that you and I never really had this discussion before sitting on my front porch. I'm a little pissed, Jess.
Yeah. Well, we got other things to talk about, Chris.
And I think we need to make sure that we are conveying that these opportunities for students and making sure that our curricula support that, right? And so we don't, because we tend to get locked into, well, here are the things that I had to do to become a geologist. So by God, we're going to make sure all of our students have that same thing, and it may not be serving them well. So we do need to look at our curricula. In fact, yes, we'll be hearing, I'm as dean calling on all of our departments to really take a close look at our curricula serving the students of today and the future. And we need to be nimble about this.
So how do we balance that? I mean, you referred to fads. We don't want to get caught up in fads. And there's always this kind of discussion and tension. I hear a little bit about the critical minerals, at least early on, some people thought, oh, it's just a fad, it's going to go away. It seems like this is here to stay, at least from my view. Like, this is just a rebranding of economic geology, and it's here. So how do you, when we're thinking about that, and maybe do you have statistics, employer statistics, or like any numbers we can kind of throw at this to make sure we kind of avoid fads while also serving students for the long term?
Yeah,
how do you think about that?
Well, because these are emerging needs too, and so there is a bit of a crystal ball there. So I think that we need to look and see. Well, there's clearly a demand to grow renewable energy, and we sort of know what those limits, and there are various limitations on the rate of that growth. I think raw material availability is part of that. So I think we know that there's going to be increased demand for people to help provide that source of materials. But I think too, one of the other things that we've focused on for many years in the geosciences is not just content knowledge. There's a certain amount of content that's needed, but it's the skill sets. And there are things that geologists are really good at, like 3D visualization, thinking in 3 dimensions, visualizing things.
I mean, it's actually impressive. I teach, GSci 1 to engineers, and it's actually impressive when you get up there and you start describing these things. Chris, you have the same experience. We talked about it ad nauseum. Like, you're describing plates thousands of kilometers wide, moving at moving over tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years. Like that is a mental leap. That it always, I forget how difficult that is initially and like how much
Manning
of a
time
mentality is.
Yeah.
Yeah, four-dimensional thinking in places at a scale we can't replicate in a lab. I always tend to forget that how much training it takes to actually think like that.
Yeah. Problem solving skills, teamwork. These are all things, communication skills. You two are doing a great job of emphasizing that through this podcast, how important it is to communicate our science to the public. So there are a lot of these, and data analytic skills.
That's
working
right.
with big data sets, and and geoscientists have always been working with big data sets and developing those skills, working with experts in data analytics making sure our students understand that. So I think there are a lot of portable skills that you get as a geoscientist, and the proof is in looking where our graduates go. I had a PhD student who graduated and then went to work for British Telecom, helping them optimize routing schemes for phone calls.
No kidding.
And it's just because he had worked with global data sets, and they were really impressed with how facile he was and thinking about times and routing and systems. And so we can't imagine where our graduates will go, but we need to give them a set of skills. And I think a fundamental, I think we understand what are some durable things that we think define the geosciences around knowledge of the way of the structure and function of the earth that I think serve our students well. And then there's all the cool stuff there that we can't forget. Because we need to, first of all, we need to draw them into our discipline. And so
that's right.
We
have a hook.
And meteors and the volcanic eruptions and things. And there's still a lot to learn there, but it's got to be part of our introductory geology coursework too. The practical stuff is kind of, where we're heading, but let's have some fun along the way and don't give up on the field trips and that sort of thing.
All the cool
absolutely.
Stuff. Yeah.
That stuff is so important too, because it is a hook. This is an easy sell, but there has to be more to it than just that, just the cool stuff. I love that.
We have the best stories. We have the best, we've got the best content, especially for that draw you in intro level class, the one science class a business major takes in their time at Penn State. You should be taking one of ours because it's the coolest, and it'll travel with you the best throughout your life. Just like walk around on a path in a stream nearby your neighborhood. You'd be like, oh, I understand how meanders work. Whoa, that's cool. That kind of stuff. I mean, totally. Anyway, sorry, Chris.
No, that's okay. So Jesse, we only have about 10 minutes left. So there are things that I definitely want to get to. So I'm really interested in also, Lee, before we end, I want to know what led you down the road of administration. I'm just personally very curious about that. So I want to make sure we get to that before we.
So let me ask you a question real quickly. We'll keep this short. What's you've been a part of so many very impressive, very long, very highly cited scientific discoveries. What's your favorite one and why? If you could possibly pick. I know that's kind of an impossible question, but
I don't know. I really liked the work we did on the end Permian mass extinction. This is the largest mass extinction of all time. And we developed a focus, my students and I, around the role that hydrogen sulfide might have played in that mass extinction. So, this is the poisonous gas that smells like rotten eggs. And we proposed, from a theoretical perspective, that the oceans at the time, there's also a huge global warming event. I mean, it ties in everything. You had the volcanic eruptions associated with the Siberian traps spewing out toxic substances and greenhouse gases, and the planet warmed, probably the hottest it's been in the last several 100 million years. But the oceans also lost all their oxygen. And when the oceans lost all their oxygen, then hydrogen sulfide builds up because bacteria switch to a sulfur-based metabolism, and the byproduct of that is hydrogen sulfide rather than CO2. And so the ocean became poisonous. And so we did some modeling that would suggest that under those conditions, not only would that kill marine life, but that hydrogen sulfide should escape to the atmosphere. And maybe that explained why the Permian extinction was so devastating to organisms on land and in the ocean, that the atmosphere became poisonous, at least episodically. And at the time we proposed this, we actually didn't know that the planet had gotten really hot. Now we understand the planet got really hot. Back then we didn't have all those temperature indicators. So anyway, it was a lot of fun. The press picked it up because they love the rotten egg, Earth fart, kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
yeah. Oh,
I did
great.
I did probably 12 documentaries.
Really?
Yeah, I have an IMDb page. And
That's great.
and and with all the most famous of the science documentary shows. And so,
Oh, that's cool.
and part of what they liked is we have a lake up in New York State called Green Lake that's poisonous at depth. And I'm a scuba diver. And so every film crew wanted to film me diving into the poisonous waters, which my wife said, Lee, I'm getting a little tired of watching you on TV diving in the poisonous waters.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're not going to come back up. But so anyway, that was a lot of fun. It helped. It tuned me into the science communication side of things because we had to, they started me over many times filming these documentaries because I was getting into jargon and not recognizing the audience who was part of, naked science or through the wormhole or something.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
Lee,
that's
do you
very
use
cool.
this as do you use the end Permian as like a lead in and a chapter in your Earth system book then? Because I mean, what you just talked about is Earth is a system.
Yeah.
Holy cow. I mean, it's
not in the first edition, but we did the Cretaceous Paleogene matrix and asteroid impacts then, because we hadn't done the Permian work, but we did bring it into the second or third edition. I can't remember. Yeah, but it really is a total Earth system thing, which is another reason why I really liked it. But, ended up that we were challenged. Well, first of all, when we first proposed this, there was no data in support of it. And that was pointed out in an article in The Economist, that there's a great idea by a company has no data to support it. He's hoping to do some work in Japan to support it. In the year that we published our theoretical paper, data came out in science articles by other groups finding evidence for hydrogen sulfide in the shallow ocean, in the photosphere, came out in that same year. So data supported. More sophisticated modeling came out though and showed that our simple model was wrong, and that under the conditions that we had modeled within the ocean, that it wouldn't have made the atmosphere poisonous in the way we did. And so in a sense, in fact, I was on a field trip up in Spitsbergen, and one of my colleagues from England who had also worked on the Permian extinction came in to our first breakfast, and he said, the hydrogen sulfide hypothesis is dead. Well, David, nice to see you too, after, hours of traveling up there. We're in the middle of nowhere, and he's announcing to this group of assembled scientists and students that my hypothesis was dead. And then he wanted to explain that. But I still think it has a role to play. Now we've learned that temperature is probably the more important kill mechanism there.
Okay. Oh, that's so interesting. Wow, what a story. That's a great one. I love that. Yeah, and academics, they're not the most socially competent at all times sometimes. You get these weird comments where you're like, calm down. I mean,
yeah. Well, and for many of us, all that we can talk about is science, right?
Yeah.
It drives our spouses crazy. Because you bring friends home to stay in your house and they don't talk about the kids or anything else or about your spouse's occupation. It's all.
Yeah, no, that's right. Whenever we have a party, my wife's like, we got to invite more. There has to be less than 50% geologists. Otherwise you guys just take over, and it's terrible. So sorry, Chris, you have a question about administration, you said, right?
Well, I'm curiously, so before we started recording, we were talking about how, you joked that you're not a bona fide, geoscientist because you're now the dean of the department. And well, I'm just curious because I have zero interest in ever going into administration. Like the thought of it turns my stomach. I'm never leaving the classroom when so I'm just really curious as to what led you down that path.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was bullying by my senior faculty colleagues. There were two attempts at that. Rudy Schlegerland and Michael Arthur are the two people who Jesse knows, who really put the pressure on me to become a department head. But actually and so I didn't have a career objective of becoming an administrator. In fact, it was a bad word for me as well. And I still don't. I still kind of cringe when all these.
Sorry.
Scientists don't like faculty members don't like administrators. But really, what it was, honestly, was it was at my dad's funeral. And my dad was a radiologist. He had become the chief of staff in the hospital, but he'd also published papers in the journal, in the AMA journal, in the Journal of Röntgen Ray Society. And there's actually a fracture named after him, the bump of Kump. So he had done research and published on this. And but I was at his funeral, and no one was talking about his publication record. No one was talking about the research that he had done. But a woman came up to me and she said, "You don't know me, but let me tell you about your dad." She said, 20 years ago, I was X-ray tech, and he was the head of the X-ray partnership there. He was my boss, and I was caught at work stoned. I had taken drugs and I was barely functioning. And my supervisor said, "Well, I'm going to fire you, but we have to go talk to the head of our unit." And so she came in and talked to my dad, and she said, he asked me, why was I taking drugs? Tell me about your life. And I was a single mom. I had 3 kids. I was struggling with daycare, and the stress got to me, and I started taking drugs. I got hooked on them. And so he said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. We're not going to fire you, but we're going to give you a leave of absence. I just have had an offer of an old shopping mall, some space there. And we were already talking about that, but we're going to set up a daycare center for all hospital employees. And in our practice, we'll pay for you to go through drug treatment. And if you can be successful in all that, you've got your job when you come out of treatment." And she said, so I went through that. I got treatment. I'm still here 20 years later. I'm the head of staff for our X-ray technician group. And it was that chance that your dad believed in me and gave me that chance. So no one cared about his bump of Kump or his papers in Röntgen Ray, but people cared about the way he helped people succeed. And so
Wow.
that in the end was what tilted me over to going ahead and saying that. I became a department head when he was still alive, and he was very proud of that. But it was that sense of having even more opportunities to help people, more power as dean, help people, that convinced me to stay on this track, because I was fully intending to go back to being a regular faculty member, because that's where my passion and love. I love working with students. I still teach one class every other year because it has an embedded field trip to the Caribbean.
I've noticed that one. I think there's a huge fraction of our department that manages to go do research in the Caribbean, snorkeling around the Bahamas or something too. It seems like a scam to me, but
Lee, that's the best possible answer that you could have given. I don't know how you got through that story without getting choked up and emotional about your father.
I mean, I was close, and I have gotten choked up in the past. When the first time I told it, I really got choked up. Yeah.
Now you make me feel guilty.
Yeah.
I have a comment on that, because I like you, I got goosebumps. I was choked up listening to that story. That's an amazing story, and it speaks to the power of good administrations and administrators. And I don't know how Lee, how you did it during COVID. I do not envy anybody in a seat of administrations during that time period. And everybody, as far as I'm concerned, at Penn State did an amazing job navigating us through that time period. So just, hats off to you for taking that on and helping us all survive.
I mean, we're all stressed out, but I think, we administrators had an opportunity here to try to minimize the additional burden on our employees and students. And we had good leadership at the university level, supportive of the accommodations that we made. So wow. It worked out.
Okay. We're over time, Lee. One last question for you. What has been your best day as a geoscientist?
Today.
I like it.
I've gotten to talk about geoscience again, not just administrative things. No, I mean, there have been so many great days, and there continue to be great days. I set my kids up set a high bar because I've always told them, I love going into work every day. I've never regretted going in because I've loved my job, every aspect of it. Working with students keeps you young, and being able to participate in this educational enterprise. So I could tell you about some of my favorite experiences traveling the world, being in Spitsbergen or Arctic Russia or Western Australia. These are all amazing experiences, but there's just so many of those. It's the best job I could imagine. People are paying me to do this stuff. So
yeah.
So
Oh, that's great. Well, that's a great answer. It's a lucky man who has every day is one of the best days. That's great. I mean, it's a good lesson in that. Well, Lee, thanks so much for your time. This has been a great conversation. I have a dozen more questions to ask you to get all sorts of stuff to get to later on. But thank you very much. We really appreciate the time.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to be on the show. Appreciate it. And thanks for hosting the show and doing all the work. And thanks to Chris for bringing Jesse to us, by inspiring him to continue on in geoscience. I'm really happy to see you still have that good, close connection. So that's great.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Lee. Just to reiterate everything Jesse said, you're the kind of person that I would want to work for. Adam.
Well, maybe we can facilitate that, Chris.
Here we go. I've been talking about bring him to Penn State. A couple years. Come on, Chris, come to Penn State, man. We'll figure it out.
I'm friends with your principal. I don't want to ruin
that. That's right. All right, thanks, Lee. We really appreciate it.
Okay, take care, everybody.
All right. Lee. Hey, thanks for listening. There are several ways to support us. First of all, first link in your show notes, go to the Camp Geo mobile app. There you can get all sorts of visual podcast series. Basically the intro to geoscience, the first class you take in a college level geology program, which Chris teaches and I teach as well. We have visual podcast series, lots of images to help you understand kind of what a silicate tetrahedron is, for instance. We also have other audiobooks that you can buy there, Grand Canyon, Grand Tetons, Yellowstone National Park, whole bunch of series on Earth's oldest rocks, etc. You can also head over to our website, planetgeocast.com. Send us an email, planetgeocast@gmail.com. Follow us on all social medias, Planet Geocast.